people think about game design, they envision these amazing handcrafted worlds with layers upon layers of complex systems and mechanics. When in reality, the majority of game design is literally just teaching people how to play the game correctly. You can do this subversively, like how Mario's initial levels provides a fail-safe area before letting you tackle a dangerous area, or you can do this directly by pausing the game and making the player go into 4 different screens, overwhelming them with information that they don't need yet, leading to the majority of players skipping this information and feeling confused later on. The more complex the game, the harder it is to introduce mechanics subversively, so when a game does something well and other games don't learn from it, it makes for a good video topic. MMORPGs are notorious for being complicated and confusing. Not only are they massive in scale, there are at least 10 different major gameplay loops you can interact with early on, unique terminology that needs to be learned, as well as an ever-changing ecosystem of behaviors and incentives that can be unique from one player's experience to another. There is a lot of information to absorb, and the majority of players quit around the starting area due to mechanical overload. And so to add on a complex attribute system, you can understand why it's normal for players to get overwhelmed and quit most MMORPGs before they even understand how the game works. Anything to lessen that burden is a win. I want to focus on the gearing aspect of vanilla World of Warcraft and how it does a great job of subversively teaching people how gearing works, especially in comparison to other MMORPGs. The WoW gearing system is fairly standard. You have gear slots which you can equip to gear into. That gear has attributes and a requirement such as armor proficiency or a level requirement, as well as a color to indicate the power of that item. While a modern core gamer knows and understands all of this, if you were to throw someone into a game and give them an item with 3 different attributes after 5 minutes of playing, it's going to be confusing. Why would a player know what constitution, tenacity, or insert adjective here means yet? Even if they were to read the description of the attribute, they still don't really know how to value it based on their limited experience within the game. This is something classic WoW avoids by ensuring that magical greed items with attributes don't appear until at least 2 hours within most gameplay experiences. Before that, you just have grey or white items, where the only important value in the item is either damage for weapons or armor for armor. If you look at an item you get at the beginning of the game, you will find a name, icon, quality color, armor proficiency, gear slot, armor, and durability information. There is already up to 7 different pieces of information for a simple item, and adding any additional complexity is not going to help newbies understand how gearing works in your game. A good way to help newbies understand how a mechanic works is to give them the simplest form of the mechanic and then give them multiple opportunities to interact with that mechanic. Classic WoW creates these multiple opportunities by front-loading the starting zones with crappy gear sets. Each mob has a high chance of dropping a piece of flayed cloth, rugged leather, or flimsy chain armor, giving someone multiple chances to learn what they can equip and how to value what is best for them. A warrior will learn that they want to prioritize mail gear over leather gear and cloth gear because it has more armor, and a mage will learn that they can only equip cloth pieces of gear, so leather and mail are worthless to them. By front-loading the initial levels with only these simple to understand and crappy gear sets, you get the player to actually engage with how to think about items. It is basically just a question of what has the most armor in a particular gear slot, but by doing that, they begin to notice that white items normally have more armor than grey items, introducing people to the concept of colored loot. During the first 30 minutes of a huge and complicated game, this is a really good way of drip-feeding players enough information to come to the correct conclusions on how to think about the basics of gearing. New players already have so much to figure out, so why add unneeded complexity when the majority of players are still in the initial learning phase of the game? I know that when I try out these new games, I'm much more concerned about controls, UI, map layout, basic combat, and simple objectives. Getting a magical piece of gear at level 2 with 3 different attributes in an upgrade slot is overwhelming and counterproductive in teaching me how to think about gear. It's like teaching algebra to a first grade student when they still haven't gotten basic arithmetic down. They don't have the fundamentals yet to really understand what each attribute does. Games like Albion Online have starting items with so many attributes that they have a scroll wheel. Fortunately, most of these stats are easy to understand, but it's still pretty overwhelming. If you give the player a bit of breathing room to learn the game first, you give them a chance to understand the context of stats and how to evaluate them when they first receive a magical item. If 1 stamina equals 10 health, the player will know what it's like to be able to take 1 additional hit per fight at level 10. And level 10 is typically where you come across your first magical item in World of Warcraft. Another thing I really like about WoW is how spread out the gearing system is throughout the levels. When you start a new character, you only have to worry about 10 different gear slots. Rings and shoulder pads typically don't drop until level 15, headpieces and necklaces don't drop until level 25, and trinkets don't drop until level 35. In addition, magical green items typically only start showing up at level 5, blue items at level 15, and epic purple items at level 35. There are probably more concepts that could be spread out, such as advanced attributes for example, but I think this is a showcase of successfully not front-loading all the complicated RPG mechanics to the player from the very beginning. This leads to, number 1, less things to understand at the start of the game, and number 2, a secondary progression system where people get excited at higher levels for filling an equipment slot they've had vacant for such a long time. If you're making a complicated game with multiple systems that work on top of gameplay loops, why not give the player some breathing room to learn how the game works before adding an additional layer of complexity? A good question to ask would be, is this system integral to making the first hour of gameplay enjoyable? If the answer is no, then delay it. In the case of WoW, teaching people how gear works and how to think about upgrades is integral to the first hour of gameplay, while magical attributes are not. If you can break down a gameplay mechanic into multiple steps, then it can be taught in multiple steps. Mario taught the basics of jumping over a minute of gameplay, WoW taught the basics of gearing over 2 hours of gameplay. What you do in your game is up to you, and is most likely going to need to be adjusted based on playtester feedback. But I would always recommend that you find ways to teach mechanics subversively through gameplay when possible. Thank you for making it through to the end of the video. If you liked what you see, then like and subscribe, and check out my free game on Steam, Platform Gun. Link in the description.